Hi, friends. I'm going to be reading. Oh, one second. So let me set up my camera. Hi, friends. Hi. I'm going to be reading Thich Nhat Hanh. I think is the camera too high? Let me see. Yes, I'm going to do a book reading. Okay, good. I guess I should get a shorter stand. Or let me see. I love to read books about peace. It's sunrise in New York City around here, and I don't know. It might be nighttime where you are. I'm here to talk about peace. I want to do a series on the life of Thich Nhat Hanh. I'm going to do live audio book readings on the life of Thich Nhat Hanh, and I realize it's important to start. Oh, there we go. Oh, see you, friends. Okay. Okay. This is better. Okay. So I'm gonna read Thich Nhat Hanh. Okay. Peace. One second. I'm setting up Studio One. Studio One, and we're gonna read on Amazon Kindle. Okay. Storybook time with Hockley. Woo! Is the camera level? I think it's a little off. It's fine. All right. How is everyone? Yeah, my camera's a little off level. This is kind of my setup. Printer, Canon. I got a Canon printer. I got an HP Envy printer and scanner. Excuse me, silly me. Okay, gonna check the audio option. Okay, cool. Thich Nhat Hanh, My Master's Robe, Stories of a Novice Monk. My Master's Robe, Other Books by Thich Nhat Hanh, Be Still and Know, Reflections from Living Buddha, Living Christ, Being Peace, The Blooming of a Lotus, Guided Meditation Exercises for Healing and Transformation, Breathe, You are alive, we are alive, Sutra on the Full Awareness of Breathing, Call Me by My True Names, the collected poems of Thich Nhat Hanh, Cultivating the Mind of Love, the practice of looking deeply into the Mahayana Buddhist tradition, the Diamond that cuts through illusion, commentaries on the Prajna Paramita Diamond Sutra, for a future to be possible, commentaries on the 5 mindfulness trainings, fragrant palm leaves, journals 1962 to 1966, the heart of understanding, commentaries on the Prajna Paramita Heart Sutra, Hermitage Among the Clouds, an historical novel of 14th century Vietnam, Interbeing, 14 Guidelines for Engaged Buddhism, A Joyful Path, Community, A Joyful Path, Community, Transformation and Peace, The Long Road Returns to Joy, A Guide to Walking Meditation, The Miracle of Mindfulness, a manual on meditation, Old Path, White Clouds, Walking in the Footsteps of the Buddha, Our Appointment with Life, Discourse on Living Happily in the Present Moment, Plum Village Chanting and Recitation Book, Wonderful Moment, Present Moment, Wonderful Moment, Mindfulness Verses for Daily Living, Stepping into Freedom, An Introduction to Buddhist Monastic Training, The Stone Boy and Other Stories, Sutra on the 8 Realizations of the Great Beings, A Taste of Earth and Other Legends of Vietnam, Thundering Silence, Sutra on Knowing the Better Way to Catch a Snake, Transformation and Healing, Sutra on the 4 Establishments of Mindfulness. My Master's Robe, Memories of a Novice Monk by Thich Nhat Hanh. Memories of a Novice Monk by Thich Nhat Hanh. Forward by Sister Annabelle Leahy. Parallax Press, Berkeley, California. Parallax Press, P.O. Box 7355, Berkeley, California 94707. www.parallax.org. Parallax Press is the publishing division of the Unified Buddhist Church Incorporated. Copyright 2002 by Unified Buddhist Church. All rights reserved. Printed in the United States of America. Cover design and illustrations by Win T. Hop and Win Dong. Text design by Win Dong. Special thanks to the sisters at Green Mountain Dharma Center and the volunteers of La Boy Press for translating the stories from the Vietnamese language. Library of Congress. Cataloging in publication data. In publication data. Nhat Hanh, Thich Thich Nhat Hanh. Thiên ngôi. Tiếng nói. English. My Master's Robe by Thich Nhat Hanh. P.cm. Translation by Thiên ngôi. ISBN 1-888-375-035. PBK 1. Nhat Hanh Thich 2. Buddhist Novices Vietnam Biography 3. Monastic and Religious Life Buddhism Vietnam 4. Priests Buddhist Vietnam Biography 1. Title BQ 962 H36A3 2002 294.3 apostrophe 657 apostrophe 092 dash DC 21 2002 002 678 2345 / 12 11 10 9. Contents forward cattle tending Brother Dong, the lizard Auntie Tu, the koan, a drop of nectar, return, the New Year bell, my Master's robe, humanity. One second, friends. I used to have this book. I think I gave it away. Zen Master, poet. Zen Master, poet and peace. Zen Master, poet and peace and human rights activist Thich Nhat Hanh was born in central Vietnam in 1966 and joined the monkhood at the age of 16. Written by the author in his late 20s, My Master's Robe is set in the heart of a peaceful monastery that is surrounded by war during the years from 1942 to 1947. My ordination was scheduled for 4 o'clock the next morning. That night, I saw my teacher sitting in his room on a cushion beside the light of a flickering candle. There was a stack of old scriptures piled high. There was a stack of old scriptures piled high. One second, friends. One second, friends. Okay. One second. Okay, there it is. That's better. I may have to make sure it's full screen. My ordination was scheduled for 4 o'clock the next morning. That night, I saw my teacher sitting in his room on a cushion beside the light of a flickering candle. There was a stack of old scriptures piled high on a table next to him. He was carefully mending a tear in an old brown robe. Brother Man and I stopped at the entrance as he slowly My Master's robe. This year, our rice field didn't yield a good crop. Our daily allowance isn't even enough to buy vegetables for the Sangha. Where can I find money to buy tofu? Listening to her and watching her smile, I felt some remorse. Poor Aunt, I loved her so much. Drum, My Master's Robe. Parallax Press, Berkeley, California, $8. ISBN. It's a bit small. It's okay. One second, friends. I'm going to feed my cat. Meow. Come with me, my friend, so we can feed our cats mindfully. Thank you, friends. Let us breathe mindfully as we connect to the present moment. Hi, friend. Let us continue our reading on peace, and Thich Nhat Hanh. Forward, written by the author in his late 20s. These stories first appeared in Phật Giáo, Buddhist magazine, between 1956 and 1959. The stories were collected in a book. The stories were collected in a book titled Tin Ngoi. Tin Ngoi? Tin Ngoi. Titled Tin Ngoi, The Sound of the People. I think so. There's no markings. Titled Tin Ngoi, Vietnamese, and published in 1964 by La Boy Press. La Boy Press, Saigon. Tin Ngoi means humanity. Tin Ngoi, Tin Ngoi, Tin Ngoi means Tin Ngoi translates humanity. Tin Ngoi translates into humanity. And the stories are about just that. Humanity in the midst of war and violence. This subject is pertinent to us in our own time, in 2002. In the face of terrorism, what lessons can we learn from the different spiritual paths? What lessons can we learn? What lessons can we learn from the different spiritual paths of the world? Terrorism could break out anywhere at any time. It is always available, even if dormant, when given the right causes and conditions. When given the right causes and conditions, the seeds of terrorism sprout. When given the right conditions, the seeds of terrorism sprout, and we have to deal with a living hell, whether perpetrated unofficially by a relatively small group of individuals or by a large army sanctioned by the state. Terrorism can be responded to by human love. Human love is always available, and we can recognize that we are one humanity, that all mothers everywhere suffer when their sons are killed in war, when the sons and daughters are killed in war. My master's robe is set in the heart of a peaceful monastery that is surrounded by war during the years from 1942 to 1947. The French fought a bitter war to maintain their sovereignty in Vietnam from 1946 to 1954. The people of Vietnam were terrorized by the colonialists, and no doubt the French soldiers suffered bitterly at the hands of the Viet Minh. It was at a time when in France the aftermath of the Second World War was still lingering heavily. This is what is meant by the sentence spoken by the young French soldier in chapter 10. Seeing the people here work so hard to rebuild their shattered lives reminds me of the shattered lives of my relatives in France. The author describes his encounter with this young French soldier in 1947. He himself was still young. He himself was still young, a fully ordained Buddhist monk. He himself was still young, a fully ordained Buddhist monk of 21 years young or so. The author says outright in this chapter that at the time he did not like French soldiers very much. Let me read this in the first person. Written by me, Thich Nhat Hanh, in my late 20s. These stories first appeared in Phat Cao Buddhist magazine between 1956 and 1957. The stories were collected in a book titled Tin Ngoi, Vietnamese, and published in 1964 by La Boy Press, Saigon. Tin Ngoi translates into humanity, And the stories are about just that, humanity in the midst of war and violence. This subject is pertinent to us in our time. In the face of terrorism, what lessons can we learn from the different spiritual paths of the world? Terrorism could break out anywhere at any time. It is always available, even when dormant. When given the right causes and conditions, the seeds of terrorism sprout, and we have to deal with a living hell, whether perpetrated unofficially by a relatively small group of individuals or by a large army sanctioned by the state. Terrorism can only be responded to by human love. Human love is always available, and we can recognize that we are one humanity, that all mothers suffer everywhere when their sons are killed in war, and daughters too. My master's robe is set in the heart of a peaceful monastery that is surrounded by war during the years. From 1942 to 1947, the French fought a bitter war to maintain their sovereignty in Vietnam. From 1946 to 1954, the people of Vietnam were terrorized by the colonialists, and no doubt the French soldiers suffered bitterly at the hands of the Viet Minh. It was at a time when in France the aftermath of the Second World War was still lingering heavily. This is what is meant by the sentence. This is what is interpreted. This is what is intended by the sentence spoken by the young French soldier in chapter 10. Seeing the people here working so hard to rebuild their shattered lives reminds me of the shattered lives of my relatives in France. The author describes his encounter. I describe my encounter with this young French soldier in 1947. I myself was still young, a fully ordained Buddhist monk of 21 years, young or so. I say outright in this chapter that at the time I did not like French soldiers very much. French soldiers had raided the monasteries for food and had executed monks belonging to the resistance movement. Sometimes in very cruel ways. The monks of my monastery, when I was a child, had been forced to evacuate for several months. In spite of this, I embraced the young French soldier I met as a true friend and a brother. In 1946 and to 1947, young monks and nuns wanted to save their country from foreign domination. Institutes of Buddhist studies were closed so that the student monks and nuns could devote more time to demonstrations and meetings supporting the national movement for independence. At the same time, the Buddhist monastery provided a nectar of compassion for the Vietnamese people during these years. The peaceful life of the monastery where true brotherhood was possible, was a small oasis in the midst of the suffering of war. To say that it was a small oasis refers only to the space that the monastery occupied. In terms of the far-reaching effects of the monastic practice at that time and the implications it would have in the future, the oasis could be conceived of as very great. 55 years after the events recounted in this book, I continue to live and shape the monastic life to reflect the good and kindness in the world. I have not shirked my responsibility for one moment. After the terrorist attacks in New York, City on September 11, 2001, I called for a 10-day fast and led ceremonies for those who died or were injured and were injured. I visited New York to help, to aid people deal with their fear and anger, and to support those who cared for the victims of the uh, and to support those who cared for the victims of the tragedy, for those who cared for the victims of the tragedy and the bereaved. My message was basically the same as we find in the conversations I had in the 1940s with my monk brother, Tam Man, Tam, Tam Man, Strong Tam, something like that. Tam Man, and the young French soldier in this book. In some of the conversations between me and brother Tam Man, there are references to the Li and Tran years, the Li and the Trung sisters, the Li and Tran years. The Li and Tran eras lasted from the 10th to the end of the 14th century in Dai Viet, the country that was the precursor of modern Vietnam. The Tran kings and the Li kings before them were Buddhists. Under their rule, the country of Dai Viet, just freed from Chinese rule, enjoyed a period of peace, prosperity, and independence. For more on 14th century Vietnam, see Thich Nhat Hanh, Hermitage Among the Clouds, an historical novel of 14th century Vietnam, Berkeley, California, Parallax Press, 1993. One second, friends. Just clicking on bookmark. The country of Dai Viet. These just their rule, the country of Dai Viet, DAI Viet, just freed from Chinese rule, enjoyed a period of peace, prosperity, and independence. These eras were an inspiration to me writing this book and my contemporaries in the movement seeking independence from colonial rule in the 20th century in the 1900s, and they are an inspiration to practicing Buddhists in our and they are an inspiration to practicing Buddhists in our own time. In my master's robe, there are some references to the physical hardships endured by the monks practicing in Hui in the 1940s. But these physical hardships never for a moment induced me to consider giving up my aspiration to live my life as a monk. When recently visiting Vietnam, I heard an elderly nun recount how the author. When visiting Vietnam, I heard an elderly nun recount how I, Thich Nhat Hanh, dressed in thin, inadequate clothing, had come back from herding the cows one day. I was shivering so much that my knees knocked together. Despite these small hardships, the beauty and joy of the monastic life never left me. This book is a testimony to the spiritual love and brotherhood and sisterhood found within the monastery, as well as to the deep joy and happiness that comes from involvement in the daily monastic practice. Outside the monastery, the real hardship was the suffering of war, and, like it or not, I could never forget that. Younger me, as a monk, could never forget that. In my poem, the fruit of awareness is ripe. See, Thich Nhat Hanh, call me by my true names, Berkeley, California, Parallax Press, 1999. That is where you can find his poem. One second, friends. The fruit in my poem, the fruit of awareness is ripe. In my poem, the fruit of awareness is ripe. I liken my youthful years to outside the monastery. The real hardship was the suffering of war, and like it or not, younger me could never forget that. Younger me as a monk. Younger monk me could never forget that. In my poem, the fruit of awareness is ripe. The fruit of awareness is ripe. The fruit of awareness is ripe. I liken my youthful years to an unripe green plum that the suffering of war bit into, leaving its 2 marks behind. The poem continues, but since I have learned how to love, the door of my soul has been left wide open to the winds of the 4 directions. The situation is calling out for revolution. The fruit of awareness is already ripe, and the door can never be closed again. The winds of the 4 directions could refer to the suffering brought about by the 3 poisons of craving. The winds of the 4 directions could refer to the suffering brought about by the 3 poisons of craving, hatred and ignorance, which result in war and violence. The situation calls for revolution, could be an allusion to the colonial status of Vietnam, and perhaps to Buddhism too. I have said that a monk is a revolutionary, but not in a political sense. I have said that a monk is a revolutionary. I Huckley am a monk. I'm a monk not. I'm a revolutionary. Woo! The other, I have said that a monk is a revolutionary. Peace is a revolutionary, but not in a political sense. The revolution is not political, but spiritual. The revolution is not political, however spiritual. It is to change our ways of thinking, and it is to change our ways of thinking and consuming. Buddhism needed to renew itself 60 years ago in order to meet the needs of the fast-changing world then, and it still needs to renew itself in our own time. The door can never be closed. Translates into that once on the comprehension of the situation of our world has given rise to compassion. We have no alternative however, to act to relieve the suffering. A young monk or nun learns in the monastery how to love. His or her teachers and brothers and sisters in the practice are there to help him or her learn this. To help him, her, they, them to learn this. The monastery can be ideal. The monastery can be the ideal place to practice such training. The monastery can be the ideal place to practice such training. In this little book, we see how the pure love of a teacher can fill the young monk's heart We see in this book how the pure love of a teacher can feel the young Thich Nhat, can feel the young Thich Nhat Hanh, can feel the young monk Thich Nhat Hanh's heart with a deep aspiration to devote his life to serving those who suffer in the world. The books on monastic discipline, when studied and practiced, provide monks and nuns with the aspirations to put their aspiration. The books on monastic discipline, when studied and practiced, provide monks and nuns with the tools to put their aspiration into practice. Eventually, the love is no longer contained within the monastery, but also flows out into the world. We can all train ourselves in love by learning the way to listen deeply in order to comprehend the situation and the suffering of the one we consider to be our enemy, and we can train ourselves to speak lovingly. The place of the monastery is to help us. To do this, it is a workshop that creates the practices that the world needs. A monk who was a peace activist in Vietnam trained a cat and a mouse to live together peacefully in a cage. He asked, why then can't human beings be trained to live peacefully on this planet Earth? I wish that this little book can be your inspiration, as it has been mine, leading us. I wish that this little book can be our inspiration, as it has been for me, leading us through delightful and often amusing stories to see our leading us through delightful and often amusing stories to see our own place in the task of relieving suffering in the world. Written by Sister Annabelle Leite about Thich Nhat Hanh. Sister Annabelle Leite, Abbess, Green Mountain Dharma Center. June 2002. Cattle tending. Our temple used to have 4 cows. The cow born. Our temple used to have 4 cows. The cow born was near the pineapple garden, and sometimes on a blazing hot afternoon, Brother Tam Man would invite me to go down to the pineapple garden to sit under the shade of the trees. Shade of the trees. There, the 2 of us would skin a pineapple and eat it, watching the mother cow as she pondered life, while her calves lingered near the barn. The truth was, the temple didn't raise cows for their milk or for their meat. We were all vegetarians. Apart from the black cat. The cat wasn't ours. We didn't know when or how he came, but he was determined to stay. As for the cows, we kept them for their manure, for the garden, that was all. The soil of the spring of the young hill, where the temple was located, was full of stones and pebbles. With the manure we made compost to grow cassava and potatoes. Those who joined the community had to pass a period of taking care of the cows for at least 3 months. Even when we were weak and thin, we had to agree to this term. Each day, while everyone else went about their tasks of sweeping, dusting, or gardening, the person in charge of the cattle would open the stable door and herd the cow and her calves to the grassy side of the mountain. 3 months after I came to the temple, I get to take care of the cows. 3 months after I came to the temple, I get to take care of the cows, saying that I got to do it. isn't an exaggeration. Relatively speaking, watching the cows was easy work and it offered me plenty of time to study. Each each sunrise, balancing a pole on my shoulders, with a large bag on either end, and a sickle in my hand, and a scythe in my hand. I took the cows into the hills. The book on monastic discipline called the Essential Vinya, Vinaya, Vinaya, the Essential Vinaya, the Essential Vinaya for daily use, the Essential Vinaya for daily use was tucked inside one of the bags. When we reached the spot where there were plenty of grass, I let the cows graze freely. I put the book under a pine tree with a stone to weigh it down so the wind wouldn't blow it away. And then I took a bag and a scythe and began to cut fresh new sprouting leaves. Okay, friends, I will leave it at the spot and we will pick up from there. So we are still in the first chapter, and Thich Nhat Hanh is talking about taking care of cows. Peace, peace, light, love. I love reading. Yay! Dream well, everyone. Peace. Hi! Hi, friends! Dream well, friends.